Tonight, soaked, snarled, and stranded. An extreme storm pummels Canada's biggest city. The dangerous deluge, the rescues, and tens of thousands without power.
Well, this is what Mom and I are stuck in, taking her to the hospital.
What it means for roads and bridges in Canadian cities battling more severe weather. Former foes turned political friends at the Republican National Convention as details emerge of an Iranian plot to assassinate Donald Trump. Also, the questions about a reported multi-million-dollar Midtown Manhattan condo for Canada's representative in New York. Plus, slamming the brakes on auto thefts in Ontario and Quebec as thieves shift gears east.
Those groups are trying Halifax now.
And the summer serenade in St. John's.
I think it says an awful lot about why we live here.
A sound symposium hitting all the right notes.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. A massive cleanup is continuing in Canada's biggest city tonight after a sudden summer storm caused chaos for tens of thousands. A torrential downpour turned major thoroughfares into massive rivers, triggering urgent rescues as water levels crept dangerously higher, stranding confused commuters and sending staff racing to place recycling bins under a leaking roof at Toronto City Hall. Typically, the city gets 74 millimeters of rain for the entire month of July. Today alone, it got almost 100. CTV's Heather Wright leads us off with the impact of the dramatic deluge.
A month's worth of rain coming down in just a couple of hours. Parts of southern Ontario, including the city of Toronto, caught in a summer storm that flooded roads, damaged homes, and left hundreds of thousands without power. In some parts of Toronto, an estimated 100 millimeters of rain fell, turning hills into waterfalls and roads into rivers. Toronto's aging infrastructure overwhelmed by the sheer volume of water. Two of Toronto's key arteries, Lakeshore Boulevard and the Don Valley Parkway, had to be shut down, with dozens of cars submerged, snarling traffic for hours.
Toronto firefighters have been looking at all of the abandoned vehicles that are submerged in the floodwaters, trying to see if anyone might still be stuck inside. We were able to talk to the driver of the red Tesla, who said he barely made it out as the floodwaters started to rise.
The windows were stuck, the doors were stuck. I couldn't open the doors of the car. The car shut down completely.
Idris Chalingba says the rain was so heavy he could barely see. When his Tesla hit a large pond of water, it shut down, trapping him inside. He was eventually able to lower a back window enough to escape.
It was really scary. It was like a horror movie.
In total, Toronto Fire says 20 people had to be rescued from cars and buildings, while crews were dispatched to nearly 500 incidents. Union Station was flooded, as were several subway stations and condo buildings. Rapper Drake posted this on social media, showing what appears to be floodwater gushing into his Toronto home.
City crews are out there clearing water basins.
Toronto's mayor said this afternoon that all city resources were being used to respond to the storm, though questions remain as to why known flood areas like the Don Valley Parkway were not shut down earlier.
Maybe the severity of it caught people by surprise, I don't know.
Chow also said this is another reminder of the need to address climate change. It will take some time for the financial cost of the storm to be tallied up. The last time the city was hit with such extreme flooding was in 2013, which caused nearly $1 billion in damage. Heather Wright, CTV News, Toronto.
And joining us now is civil engineering professor Slobodan Simonovic. Professor, we've long heard warnings about the link between climate change and extreme weather. Is what we saw today an example of that?
It is hard to directly associate every event to changing climate. What we may say for the event today is that climate change definitely contributed to something like this, However, it will take some time, data collection and processing, to fully understand how much the climate change contributed to this and how much the other factors.
But we know what the impact can be, and it's clear how crippling these severe storms can be, especially when we are dealing with aging infrastructure such as roads and bridges. How prepared, in your opinion, are Canadian cities to withstand similar shocks in the future? And what is the major concern right now?
In my opinion, we are not prepared. There are, a number of, I think, reasons for that. One that cities are pointing out, including Toronto Mayor today, is funding. Another factor is very old infrastructure that's not properly being maintained. And the third factor is acceptance of the fact that conditions are changing, and we need to take into consideration that future in making decisions on the design, maintenance, and operations today.
All right, Professor, appreciate your perspective. Thank you. At the Republican National Convention, the politicians who battled Donald Trump to lead the party rallied behind him tonight and made a pitch for unity, as Trump made another unscheduled appearance late tonight with his running mate, J.D. Vance. This as details are emerging of another assassination plot against Trump. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malbin is in Milwaukee again tonight.
Republicans in Milwaukee were already buzzing when the crowd went wild as Donald Trump made another surprise visit tonight, still wearing that white bandage over his ear, just days after a gunman in Pennsylvania tried to kill him.
Like the gentleman said last night from the Teamsters, he is a tough SOB.
As Trump unifies and builds his party, a gesture of goodwill, a last-minute invite to Trump's once bitter political rivals, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who once called Trump toxic, now on board the Trump train.
President Trump asked me to speak.
Making peace and preaching unity, Haley endorsed Trump, telling her delegates to support him too.
I'll start by making one thing perfectly clear. Donald Trump has my strong endorsement, period.
This love-in solidifying support behind Trump in stark contrast to Democratic infighting, campaigning in the battleground state of Nevada.
And I am all in.
Embattled President Joe Biden fighting off allegations from his own party that he's too old and should step aside, asking, what about the other guy?
Look, why don't you guys ever talk about the 28 lies he told?
And tonight, a new report that Secret Service had already ramped up protection around Donald Trump after learning of an Iranian plot targeting the former president. But there's no indication that Thomas Crooks, the 20-year-old would-be assassin, is connected to the plot, as the FBI still tries to figure out why he tried to kill Trump. Moments before Crooks opened fire, a local police officer had crawled up on the roof, locking eyes with him. Tom Knights, a manager, says the officer was able to pull his head up over the roof.
He did, in fact, see an individual on the roof with a weapon. Turned towards him, had the barrel of his weapon pointed at the officer.
Knight says the police officer defensively ducked and fell to the ground. He radioed Secret Service that the suspicious person lurking around the Trump rally was in fact a gunman.
That building was nowhere near the outer perimeter. There is no excuse for not having someone posted on the roof of that building.
The attempted killing of the former president is being described as one of the worst failures by Secret Service in decades. Milwaukee is already a city on edge. Hundreds of police officers, helicopters, and drones. Security is incredibly tight. Omar?
All right, Joy, thank you. And a reminder, CTV National News will broadcast live from the Republican National Convention when Donald Trump addresses delegates on Thursday. Healthcare and improving access to family doctors in the spotlight as Canada's premiers gathered for a summit in Halifax. CTV's Judy Trin with their message to the Prime Minister.
Privatization is a poison pill!
Frontline workers and advocates rallying to be heard while Canada's premiers got to work behind closed doors. In the north, all healthcare is in short supply.
We're looking for access to basic healthcare so someone in the community knows that there is a nurse or there is a doctor in their community in case they need them.
About 6.5 million people across Canada do not have a family doctor. To find solutions, experts say the provinces need data.
Well, you need to know the list of people. You need to know exactly how many people and who they are that are in your province who don't have access to care, and build out a plan.
There's a need to recruit more doctors, nurses, and retain them. Doctors want a reduction in paperwork, while nurses want more responsibility.
Nurses can be really running clinics and doing things in primary care that can offload the burden from our family physicians.
Over the next decade, the federal government will transfer $200 billion to the provinces and territories for health care. The Liberal minority government, backed by the NDP, put in place dental care for lower-income families and passed legislation to provide diabetic drugs and contraceptives to Canadians who need them. But the premiers say Ottawa is disrespecting the boundaries.
As provinces and territories, we have certain things that are in our wheelhouse that are our jurisdiction, and we know a lot about them, and we know what we need.
The premiers are also uniting to push back against the federal government for funding housing that bypasses the provinces and goes directly to the cities. Some premiers are also launching a legal fight to change how equalization payments are calculated. Judy Trin, CTV News, Halifax.
The odds of a looming interest rate cut grew today after a new snapshot revealed inflation is cooling. CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver walks us through the numbers.
Hi there. Thousands of meals are served at the Ottawa Mission every day, but rising food costs mean the shelter's donations aren't going as far.
As much as creative as Chef Rick is with his menus, we're still fighting to stretch $1 so we can provide this unprecedented increase in demand.
There you go. Enjoy your lunch. Today, chicken fingers, salad, and fries are being served up. Ingredients that in January 2021 cost an average of $20.99. Now the same items and quantities are 20% more expensive, at an average of $25.22.
You can't raise money from your donors at 22% over 3 years, so we're having to balance the scale somewhere here or there.
Food inflation has come down since it peaked in 2023, but extreme weather, global supply chains, and energy costs have meant it's still rising and slowing the decline of inflation overall. Last month, the Consumer Price Index rose by 2.7%, down from 2.9% in May.
We do think that we're going to see inflation continue to ease. So moving back towards the 2% target. Now, it's, not a science. You certainly can't expect to be on the dot at 2.
And that positive outlook is likely good news for anyone paying interest. Next week, the Bank of Canada will make its next rate decision. And with inflationary pressures easing, experts say another rate reduction is likely.
We're seeing some progress, and I think it still supports a Bank of Canada cut next week.
Just because inflation is easing doesn't mean that consumers should expect to see prices go down at the grocery store or at the pumps. Economists say it's important to remember that prices are still rising, Omar, just at a slower rate than they were before.
That interest rate decision coming next Wednesday. All right, Annie, thanks. And that decision and announcement will be closely watched by anyone looking to buy a home. But tonight there are questions about another reported real estate transaction for a Canadian diplomat in New York. CTV's Mike LeCouture explains.
There are a few perks to being Canada's representative in New York City, and this is one of them. A condo on Billionaires Row, south of Central Park. The residence on the 11th floor will be home to Consul General and former journalist Tom Clark.
He is your governor.
According to the Canadian press, the government purchased the unit for about $9 million. The 3,600 square foot residence includes access to a swimming pool and paddle tennis court.
$9 million on an apartment at a time where Canadians can't afford to eat or house themselves, I say again, is outrageous.
The old place, seen here in a 2003 W5 special, needed extensive renovations, according to Global Affairs Canada. The department adds the move will actually save taxpayers $2 million. In a statement to the Canadian press, a spokesperson said, considering the high renovation costs for the current residents and the value of the property, Global Affairs Canada recommended a relocation to a new, smaller, more suitable and more economical apartment.
If you want to play in the big leagues,
you have to pay to some degree.
This former diplomat points out Canada needs these types of residences to host influential lawmakers abroad.
Ambassadors or consuls general are housed very well and generally in the middle of the pack. So not so lavish and also not so shabby, but pretty much where we are as a country.
In 2013, the Harper government sold the High Commissioner's residence in London for $530 million, money that went to renovate the current embassy known as Canada House. The Conservative deputy leader wouldn't say if they'd do the same.
I think a new Pierre Poilievre government is going to look right across government to find efficiencies and savings for all Canadians on all fronts.
CTV News asked Global Affairs Canada if the old Manhattan residence will be sold to offset the cost of the new one. They have yet to respond. Omar?
All right, Mike, thanks. Coming up, Canada's car theft crackdown. Where it's working and where it's not. Plus, a maritime musical tradition. Some good news tonight to Canada's auto theft crisis. Here's CTV's Paul Hollingsworth.
The crackdown on car theft in Canada is starting to pay off. Through the midway mark of 2024, the number of cars snatched is down 17% compared to the same time last year.
Overall, it's a promising step that a lot of the things that have been discussed over the last couple of years are beginning to take hold.
New strategies by police, border officials, insurance companies, and multiple levels of government appear to be working. The rate of auto theft in Canada is down 36% in Quebec, 14% in Ontario, and 5% in Alberta. The rate climbed 11% in Atlantic Canada, but police say the actual number of cars stolen in the region is still low.
It doesn't appear at this point that we're seeing, the same scale at which this is happening in other parts of the country.
While the numbers are declining, they still are rather high. So far in Canada in 2024, more than 28,000 cars have been stolen. As authorities clamp down on car theft in heavily populated areas, thieves are shifting their focus to find new hotspots in the country.
If Montreal ends up being a little bit more scrutinized than Vancouver does, those groups are trying Halifax now.
In January, Italian authorities seized 251 vehicles stolen in Canada that were bound for the Middle East. It's a classic example of how cars swiped in this country are quickly exported.
We're all seeing images and reports of these vehicles with their Ontario plates or their Quebec plates in Central Africa.
Canada is still recouping from more than $1 billion worth in insurance claims over each of the past 2 years. While experts see positive signs, it's still a ways to go to make a serious dent on car theft. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Halifax.
Still ahead, a rough ride at the ticket office for Regina's CFL team. One of the CFL's most loyal football fan bases is being called out. CTV's Allison Bamford tells us why.
All sorts of cool things.
The green and white faithful still remember the days of sold-out crowds and the roar of the 13th man.
It was electric, like every game, right?
Lance Hakowich and his son have been in the stands for decades of milestones, including the last home game, when the team recorded its lowest attendance since Mosaic Stadium opened in 2017, just shy of 24,000 fans.
That rider pride, is it withering away a bit? Maybe.
Prompting a plea from the team's head coach to pack the place like the good old days at the next home game.
Our fan base has been the best in the league and continues to be, but there's room for improvement.
Attendance has been slipping for years. In 2017, more than 30,000 fans attended every Rider home game. Last year, only 1 of 10 games reached that level, and the team lost $1.1 million in revenue, blaming the economy and the Riders' lackluster performance.
A lot of fans are cautious until after Labor Day. If they can continue to win on Labor Day and after Labor Day, we could see business pick up.
Still, the average league-wide attendance has grown gradually since plummeting during the pandemic, and a rivalry matchup against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on Friday has the Riders hopeful they can revive some of that Rider pride. Allison Bamford, CTV News, Regina.
After the break, the sweet sounds of summer in St. John's Harbor. We leave you tonight with a maritime melody. CTV's Garrett Barry on the vessels tooting their horns in St. John's.
Maybe it's a stand-in for the calls of a whale, the moan of a foghorn, or the angry sounds of traffic.
For some people, it's the first time they experience the environment as a musical element.
Here in St. John's, you can love it or hate it, but there's no escaping the harbor symphony as the ship horns ring out downtown.
I think that's sort of the beauty of it, is that people participate in it. Even if they like it, they don't like it, they're subject to it.
It's only 5 minutes. Geez, come on, boys. 5 minutes a day. Give us a break here.
Each piece is carefully composed. About an hour before showtime, volunteers are given their beeping orders, told which of the half dozen or so boats they'll board. And they rehearse their parts with sheet music unlike anything you've ever seen. It's a mix of organized and improv. The city is their stage. There's a lot they can't control.
Improvisation, that allowing for things to just be and creating from those places.
If you think the harbor echo is going to be 3 seconds, you can build that 3 seconds into your piece, but it might not happen. So there's a lot of uncertainty.
After a radio countdown, it starts. It's been a sound of summer in St. John's for decades now. Since 1983, when the idea was conceived. The shape of this city makes a perfect sort of playground. The hills make an amphitheater for the sound to ring out.
I think it says an awful lot about why we live here. It talks about the boats, the vessels that have been sailing here for 500 years, the kind of living that people make off the sea in Newfoundland.
The idea has charmed musicians across the country.
The sound waves bounce off the water, off the cliffs, and they roll back over the city. I think that's a fabulous thing.
A distinctive sound synonymous with this city and Newfoundland. Garrett Barry, CTV News, St. John's.
So creative. That's a snapshot of this Tuesday for all of us at CTV National News. Thank you for watching, and good night.
Canada's #1 newscast for excellence in journalism.
We begin tonight with breaking news.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina, winner of the Canadian Screen Award for Best National Newscast. Watch weeknights at 11.